Hello, I'm Dr. Dave. How can I help you?
I would like help selecting a new Wedge trumpet mouthpiece.
Oh, how did you hear about the Wedge mouthpiece?
Well, last week we had a new trumpet player sit in on second so we could check him out. He wasn't playing a wedge in the orchestra, but he mentioned that he used one for lead. He was very strange. He would point at my mouthpiece and then point to his and smile at me. He was sitting beside me and would hum along with the music and give me a thumbs up after I played a passage, or would give me tips on my playing when he wasn't asking me where we were in the music. His chops gave out after about half an hour, but apparently he is a really good lead player. Actually, he's not a bad singer either. Anyway, he got me thinking about mouthpieces, so I thought I would check out the Wedge.
How do you know he is a good lead player?
Our oboe player recognized him from another orchestra he plays in. Apparently the guy passed out and collapsed onto him while playing a lead solo with the orchestra, but I guess he did have some great high chops. From what I saw last week, I think he might have fried his brain doing that a few too many times. Anyway, it got me thinking, so I googled Wedge mouthpieces and they seem interesting.
Oh, so you have met Larry the lead player.
Yes. He made quite an impression.
Well, I am glad you are here. I have a few questions. What mouthpiece are you using now?
I play everything on a Bach 1.5C. Thank you.
How did you choose that mouthpiece?
It was a gift from my mother. She gave me quite a few mouthpieces over the years.
Really? That's very nice.
Yes, my mother was a wonderful woman, but I guess there's no good way to say this. She also was a viola player.
Oh, I am so sorry.
It's okay. We all came to accept that she could not play the violin. Anyway, when I was very young, I told her that I wanted to be a trumpet player when I grew up.
And what did she say?
She said, "Oh honey, that's so cute, but I'm sorry. You can't actually do both."
So she knew quite a bit about trumpets and trumpet players.
Yes. Anyway, she did give me a trumpet in my first mouthpiece. That one was a Bach 7C.
Of course. That would be the usual mouthpiece choice.
Over time I graduated to more and more advanced mouthpieces until I arrived at the venerable 1.5C. Now I consider myself to have survived the trumpet mouthpiece rite of passage and proved myself to be a real man and a competent orchestral player. I am very proud of that. Thank you.
Okay. What type of music do you mostly play?
I play lead in our local big band, and I am principal trumpet in a community orchestra.
Okay. What would you like to get from a new mouthpiece that your Bach 1.5C is not providing?
I would like to have a darker sound for the orchestra. I want better range and endurance, especially for playing lead.
Of course. We are, after all, trumpet players. What is your reliable range on your current mouthpiece?
I can play a high C or D when I am fresh.
And when you are tired?
Then I might struggle to get to the high C.
Great, that's pretty typical range for an advanced amateur like you and me. And what would you like your range to be?
I would really like to have a reliable double G.
Are you looking for one mouthpiece or two?
I would like one mouthpiece that can do everything.
Okay, let's unpack some of that. You mentioned that the 7C is a beginner mouthpiece, but do you know why it has that reputation?
Because it is small and shallow and easy to play?
Sorry, the correct answer is that it became popular as a beginner mouthpiece because Vincent Bach liked it and included one with new trumpets. It feels small because of the rim shape, but the diameter is actually very close to a 5C, and the cup is actually deeper than a Bach 1.5C. The Bach cups get shallower as you move to a 5C and 3C. The 3C is actually the shallowest C cup Bach makes. Then the 1.5C cup is deeper again, about like a 5C. So this whole thing about graduating from the 7C to more advanced mouthpieces does not really make much sense.
Wow, I had no idea the 3C was shallower than a 5C and 7C.
Most people don't realize that. Let me ask you another question. What type of work do you do?
I am a carpenter.
Okay, when you want to drive a big nail, do you use a full-size framing hammer or a small tack hammer?
A framing hammer, or better yet, I would use a nail gun.
Why?
It is a much more efficient tool.
Exactly. Trumpet mouthpieces are the same. The mouthpiece is a tool. It is often a good idea to use a particular tool for a specific job, although some tools can do more than one job. So you might consider having one mouthpiece for the orchestra and one for lead.
I wish I could, but right now I can only afford one new mouthpiece.
I understand. So maybe we should try to find you a mouthpiece that will serve both purposes, although it might not be the ideal mouthpiece for either the orchestra or for lead. Sort of a medium-sized hammer.
That makes sense.
Of course, this does mean making some compromises. The multi-tool is not going to perform like a dedicated tool for a given job. Are you wanting to keep the same sound you have now, or would you be okay with a slightly brighter sound?
I don't want to be brighter.
Okay. Sound color, meaning brighter or darker, can, as you know, be manipulated by the player, and is also determined by cup depth and shape, and to a lesser extent by cup volume. The mouthpiece most similar to your Bach 1.5C, or similar large orchestral mouthpiece, would be a Wedge 67 MdV. If you want to get a boost in range and endurance, and want something similar to your 1.5C, that would be the one to try.
Okay, so should I get that one?
Maybe. If you were playing in a large professional symphony orchestra where you needed a huge sound, and if you were not having significant challenges with range and endurance, it would probably be the best choice. But you are playing in a smaller community orchestra and big band, and want to significantly increase your range and endurance. You could get an extra boost in range and endurance with very little change in your sound if you tried a slightly smaller diameter.
But I have read online that lots of players have the same range on any mouthpiece, no matter the size. Your range is your range, and you just have to practice more to improve it.
There is no substitute for practice, and correct technique is also important when it comes to range and endurance, but I can tell you, based on almost 50 years playing trumpet, and helping hundreds of players like you to choose mouthpieces, and from the feedback of thousands of other customers, that it is often possible to increase range with the right mouthpiece. Players who say their range is the same on any mouthpiece are usually referring to picking up a horn when fresh and playing. Things are often different an hour into a gig.
That makes sense.
If you are playing on a larger diameter and fairly deep cup, there are a few changes you can make. A smaller rim diameter will mostly improve endurance, and also range when you are tired, and not have much effect on your sound. A shallower cup will usually improve range and endurance, but make the sound brighter. That's the trade-off.
Okay, so if I wanted to try a slightly smaller wedge, what would it be?
If you want to keep the same cup depth and sound, you should try a 66 MdV, which is sort of 5C territory.
But won't a smaller mouthpiece produce a smaller sound?
By smaller, do you mean not as loud?
Yes.
Okay. How long have you played in the orchestra?
10 years.
In those 10 years, how many times has your conductor asked you to play louder?
Almost never.
Right. And what happened when he asked you to play louder?
He regretted it.
Exactly. I have often been asked to play softer, or nicer, or more in tune, or for longer, but almost never louder. Louder is not usually a problem for us as trumpet players. Higher and longer, yes. Louder, not so much. Also, lots of players find they still get a big sound from a smaller wedge.
What about flexibility? I once tried a much smaller mouthpiece and I lost flexibility.
It is true that a smaller rim diameter can reduce flexibility. That is mostly an issue when you get into really small sizes. However, with the wedge, that is less of an issue, because the wedge rim actually increases flexibility.
But I find larger rims more comfortable.
A larger rim will almost always feel more comfortable than a smaller rim if you compare them side by side. But what is more important, extra comfort, or optimal performance?
Performance.
Agreed. Your mouthpiece needs to be comfortable enough for sustained practice and playing without being unpleasant, but the audience does not care how your mouthpiece feels on your chops. They care about what is coming out of your horn. If I want something that feels really nice on my lips, I am going to go and give my wife a kiss.
One other thing, I have also found that a smaller mouthpiece sounds too focused, not broad enough.
There are ways to get a broader sound from a smaller mouthpiece, such as using a larger throat or backbore.
Okay, this all makes sense. What if I did want to try a slightly shallower cup? Can I do that without sounding brighter?
There are ways to get around that, like adding weight to the mouthpiece. If you did want to try a slightly shallower cup, you could try an MV cup, which is similar to a Bach 3C cup. Using an MV cup while adding extra weight with a heavy backbore can sound almost as dark as a deeper MDV cup. By the way, the Bach 1.5C is a pretty standard orchestral mouthpiece. What makes you think you need a darker sound in the orchestra?
I don't know. I just keep hearing that a better sound is a darker sound, so I thought that would be better.
Actually, bright and dark are relative terms. The trumpet is a bright-sounding instrument. Within the spectrum of typical trumpet sounds, the orchestral trumpet is usually darker sounding than a lead trumpet, but it is still not a mellow sound.
So assuming I wanted to stick with the deeper cup, how will the 66 MDV work for playing leads in big band?
It is not what I would usually recommend. The cup is too deep. It produces a sound that is not what is usually bright enough with sufficient projection for big band lead, and it is difficult to play for long in the upper register. Very few professional lead players would use a mouthpiece that deep. It's just too much work. A better lead mouthpiece would be something like a Chuck Findlay 66S or perhaps a 65S.
What about an in-between mouthpiece that can do everything?
The best choice to split the difference between orchestra and lead would be a Chuck Findlay 66 MV. It would be better than the 66 MDV for lead, and still work well in the orchestra, especially if you use a heavyweight backbore to dampen the brighter overtones. It would be a good compromise in a single mouthpiece. It is similar to a 3C, which is arguably the most popular and versatile mouthpiece ever made.
If I go to a shallower cup, will I lose my big fat low register?
To some extent it will change. Here is what I most often see. Players using a mouthpiece that is too big for them complain about range and endurance despite lots of practice. They have a big, fat low register, but the sound quickly gets small and strained sounding above the staff, and peaks at around high C. Their sound profile is shaped like a short pyramid, big at the bottom and small and pointy at the top. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
What we want is a sound profile like a Roman column. It might be a bit narrower at the base, but still strong. It should be more even from top to bottom, with a consistent character and volume above the staff, and it should extend higher than the pyramid. What you lose in the lower register from a slightly smaller mouthpiece you more than gain in the upper register, and the ease of playing in that range allows you to be more focused on the music and less focused on hitting the notes. It is a good trade-off for many players.
Will switching to a Chuck Findlay 66 MV give me a solid double G?
No, probably not. But based on your current range, if you are a typical case, you will own the high C and D all day long. Before I invented the wedge, my range was about the same as yours. Now I have a usable E and maybe an F, but I would not count on an F in performance. That is pretty typical, and what you can reasonably expect from a 66 MV based on where you are now.
But I really wanted a darker sound for the orchestra.
I hear that a lot. It sounds like you are already a pretty solid player. But spend some time listening to recordings of great orchestral players, and model your sound after that, rather than the idea that the trumpet should sound dark. Listen to some of the great movie soundtracks like Star Wars, Raiders, Born on the 4th of July, any soundtrack by John Williams. Or any orchestral works with lots of brass. Mahler 5th. The Bach 1.5C is dark enough for the vast majority of professional orchestral trumpet players. If you want a darker sound than that, you probably don't need a different mouthpiece. You probably need a flugelhorn.